Good afternoon, Professor, and welcome to Lucknow. For the audience, you've already been introduced to Professor Mukherjee, one of our most eminent historians, who is here today to speak to us about a subject which is very dear to Lucknow, and I think very much in keeping with the metaphor of this particular Litfest, which is the Gandhian philosophy. Not that it talks in terms of necessarily peace, because it is about the war of 1857 and the role of Begum Hazrat Mahal, who led that battle on behalf of the Lucknowis. Louder? I'll put it closer to my mouth. Is that better? That's right, that's lovely. So, Begum Hazrat Mahal, who was a warrior, but the idea of resistance against oppression, in order not to promote hatred, but in order to promote harmony. I think, Professor, you'll agree with me that Begum Hazrat Mahal's letter to Queen Victoria, questioning the intentions of the British insofar as Awadh was concerned, bring out this facet of the Begum, of the promotion of harmony, harmonious living inside the society of Awadh and inside India, in fact.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the running theme, or one of the running themes of the proclamation that Begum Hazrat Mahal issues in counter to the Queen's proclamation in 1858. One of the themes is that the entire annexation of Awadh as well as other regions of India are based on no notion of legality. And she's actually now saying, how can you talk of legality in 1858 when in the past you have always denied legality? So that's one theme. The other theme also, she's saying that the statement about respecting which the Queen's proclamation does make, that respecting the religion of the subjects, the Queen's subjects in India, she says this is a statement of bad faith, because you have actually never respected the religions of Indians in the past. Your rule hasn't done this ever. And so how can you now suddenly proclaim this, and how can you expect the people of India and the people of Awadh to believe in this proclamation? So I think these are two running themes. But as you said, I mean, the other thing I want to emphasize, not resistance, as you say, without disharmony is a very, very major phenomena. I would like to use the word phenomena advisedly in the uprising of 1857, not just in Awadh, but across the whole of North India, which was enveloped by that remarkable resistance against British rule, is that this uprising had no occurrence of any kind of Hindu-Muslim conflict. In fact, the message of the uprising, every single ishtihar issued by any number of leaders of the uprising, stretching from Delhi to Jagdishpur and Patna, Amar Singh and Jagdish Singh in Bihar, right down to Jhansi, and of course Lucknow and Farrukhabad and places like that. Every single ishtihar speaks that this is a joint fight against a foreign Firangi ruler who is trying to destroy the religion. And the word religion is actually kind of a convenient mistranslation. The two words that they use, that the Firangis are trying to destroy the dharma and the deen of the Indian people. So, I mean, the best way to conflate those two terms is to say that they're trying to destroy the tradition of India. what holds Indian society, the fabric of Indian society. They are trying to destroy that. And it's the duty of every single person, irrespective of their religion, whether they are Hindus or they are Muslims, to resist this. And they should fight together. This is a joint fight. So it keeps on harping about the necessity for maintaining Hindu-Muslim fraternity. And it's very interesting that in Farrukhabad, in late 1857, the British government actually spent 50,000 rupees, a lot of money in those days, to incite the Hindu population of Farrukhabad against the Muslim Nawab of Farrukhabad. And they admit that this venture has failed because the Hindus haven't responded to our monetary bribing. So I think this is another aspect of 1857 that needs to be highlighted, especially in the India that we live in today. And I think that the most poignant and the most powerful manifestation of this spirit of unity was articulated in Lucknow itself, when on the 5th of July 1857, when the sepoys, Hindu sepoys, I might say, embraced and crowned the young Birjas Qadar, 12 years old, and hailed him as, "You are our Kanhaiya." What can be more poignant than this? That a Muslim boy of 12 years old is hailed by Hindus as, "You are our Kanhaiya." I think we should remember this as a very, very powerful moment in the making of modern India.
And of course, as you know, the last Nawab, the last king of Awadh, Wajahat Ali Shah, used to actually play the role of the Kanhaiya.
Yeah, so I should have mentioned that. He used to, in his operas, dance as Krishna. So I think in a sense, the populace around Birjas Qadar is invoking that as well. Invoking his father, the spirit of his father as well.
This resonates the film of Satyajit Ray on Awadh, Shatranj Ke Khiladi, in which, of course, there's about the abdication and about the uprising and the war of 1857. And in that, of course, this harmonious existence which existed in UP, in Awadh of that time, is brought out. But tell me, Professor, I think the audience would be interested to know that at this time also, in the context of what you mentioned, about their wanting to incite the communities in Awadh against each other. The point is that Awadh was then ruled by a Muslim king. He'd been a king since the time of Ghaziuddin Haidar. But in fact, the ruling class, which was the Talluqdars, most of them were Rajput and Kayast. And there were, of course, some Muslims, Shia and Sunni. Could that have been the reason why in 1855 a confrontation was arranged at the Babri Masjid
Hanuman Gadi,
in order to undermine the rule of this Muslim king over his Hindu subjects?
What today we would call a law and order situation was created around Hanuman Gadi, and to actually embarrass Wajahat Ali Shah, and to prove, as it were, in empirical terms, that Wajahat Ali Shah was incapable of ruling, which is what administrators like Sleeman and Outram had been saying for at least 4 or 5 years, and they provided the groundwork for Dalhousie's annexation in 1856. So you're absolutely right, but it's interesting that when the uprising happened, the Mahants of Hanuman Gadi were actually with the rebellion.
This is interesting. Now, coming back to Begum Hazrat Mahal, who of course you have written about and spoken of, there is very little literature on this woman who I'm convinced, and most Lucknowis are convinced, was a very great woman. I do know, and I have recounted to you the story of my having visited with the family of Wajid Ali Shah in Calcutta. But they are not great admirers of Begum Hazrat Mahal, so she has invited a lot of criticism from many people. Yet, how do you assess her role as leader of that revolt of 1857? Or it would not be really a revolt technically, it was a war of independence, as Veer Savarkar has described it. But then also, if you can clarify on that point what your view would be, because at that time, of course, this was the East India Company that was ruling, it was not even the British government. So was it a war, was it a revolt, and what would you cast Begum Hazrat Mahal's role in that war as?
So, let me take the second question first, because it's easier for me to answer that. I still persist in calling this the revolt of 1857 or the uprising of 1857, instead of bestowing it a heavier term like First War of Indian Independence, that it was fighting foreign rule, Firangi rule. There is no doubt about that. And it saw Firangi rule as being alien. There's no dispute about that. But whether it was a war of Indian independence, I still have a query about that, because this was largely a North Indian affair. The territory that was affected or were engulfed in rebellion and uprising ranged from Delhi to Patna, Jhansi to the Terai. So if you look at Western India, and particularly if you look at South India, and certainly Bengal, where I come from, there's nothing stirring there, as it were. In fact, the Bengali middle class, my forefathers, were completely against the rebellion. Okay, so we have to be a little careful before we use the term Indian to describe this uprising. So I can come back to it later. I have a different explanation of this phenomenon as well, but I'll come back to it in a minute or a couple of minutes. I want to talk about Begum Hazrat Mahal, who is one of the centerpieces of this afternoon's conversation. So I'm actually struggling to write a book on Begum Hazrat Mahal, a historical book, not a fictional account of Begum Hazrat Mahal. Begum Hazrat Mahal, the two leading women in the Indian uprising, Begum Hazrat Mahal and Lakshmi Bai of Jhansi. So I'm trying to do a kind of parallel life of these two great warrior queens, if you like. So, and I use the word struggling advisedly, because there is, so far Begum Hazrat Mahal is concerned, the evidence on her early life is very scanty, very, very scanty. And B, where it is available, it's controversial, because we do not know for certain. For example, one theory is that she was the daughter of an African slave of Wajid Ali Shah. We don't know for certain. I mean, there is the other theory that which you were speaking about before we came on stage, that she might have come from Nepal and had been sold to this Julaha family. So what we do know, if we for the moment leave aside the exact origins, whether she had African blood in her or she had Nepali blood in her, if you leave that aside, what is very clear that she was of very humble origin, okay, who was probably picked up by Wajid Ali Shah, maybe because she was good looking or whatever, and she was brought into the Parikhana, from where she became a wife of Wajid Ali Shah for a very short time, by the way. So she gets married in 1845 and she's made into, she's called a Mahal. She's given the title of Mahal. She was originally called Mahakpari, and then she is made into a Mahal, and she's given the rather grandiose title Nawab Iftikharun Nisa Begum Hazrat Mahal Sahiba. But as I said, especially after this title is given to her after Birjis Qadar is born to her and Wajid Ali Shah. And when she is the mother of the son of the king, she's given this title, elevated as it were. But as I said, for a very short time, because we know in 1850, Wajid Ali Shah actually divorces her, gives her talaq, and throws her out of the zanana. Now, one theory, and this is palace gossip, is that Wajid Ali Shah's mother didn't quite like his son and king banding with a lowly origin woman, whatever that is. Or there might have been a power struggle within the court itself, and the Queen Mother won. But she was a rather domineering personality, as we know from what happens later. And so she's out of the court, she's out of the zanana, and she also isn't chosen by Wajid Ali Shah, for obvious reasons that I've just talked about, to go with him when he is exiled to Calcutta. So she remains in Lucknow. She remains in Lucknow, and when, after the Battle of Chinhut, on the 30th of June, when the rebels actually register their first victory against the British forces, and they decide that they are going to announce that there is a new king in Awadh, it is she who puts forward her son to be quote-unquote crowned. Okay, I say quote-unquote crowned because I have very serious doubts about whether the Nawabs of Awadh, which is actually their technically correct title, could ever be called king, because they were called king by an East India Company, by the East India Company. They were given the title by the East India Company, who were complete usurpers. Complete usurpers. They had no standing whatsoever, legal, formal, whatever definition you want to put it, to crown anybody.
It was not the British government.
Yeah, it wasn't the British government. So it's best to call them Nawab of Awadh, so I'm using the word crown within quotation marks. And it's interesting, when Birjis Qadar is declared, as we've seen in a very moving scene, to be the leader of the rebellion, the king of Awadh, etc., etc., he doesn't call himself, or the Begum Hazrat Mahal doesn't allow her son to call himself a king. She says, or he says, obviously prompted by his mother, that I am the wali, I am the governor of the emperor, Badshah in Delhi, which is what the Nawabs of Awadh had always been. They were the delegates of the Badshah in Delhi. And that's how Birjis Qadar sees himself, and he actually sends formal tokens of allegiance to Badshah, who is also now, by this time, the declared leader of the rebellion after the fall of Delhi. So, and of course, as a 12-year-old, Birjis Qadar had no say in these matters. He was being prompted by his mother. But from this time onwards, it is Begum Hazrat Mahal, together with the Talukdars of Awadh, are leading the uprising. And the Begum's role is not just a backroom role. She is actually at the forefront of the battle. People forget this, that she was not a Pardanashin woman. She fought, she was seen in Alambagh leading the attack. She was active in the bombardment of the residency. And of course, and there are documents to show this, in planning in great detail how the resistance to the advancing British forces would be carried out. What would be the deployment of troops? I've got it here, I can read it out if time permits. How detailed those plans are. And obviously, she and her council of advisors are working these things out. So she is a very active agent in the rebellion. And I don't think we should forget that. I mean, there cannot be a rebellion in Awadh without Begum Hazrat Mahal. I mean, this is a very important point. And also that this is not a queen. She is no longer a queen. She is actually a representative of the common people of Awadh. And the people, it was a rebellion of the common people of Awadh.
This is an extremely important point that you made, Professor, because Professor Michael Edwards, in writing about her, has described her as a dancing girl who became a queen and remained a queen to the end, in the context of the letter to Queen Victoria, which you have written about. But Professor, it would be good if you could read out those excerpts from your book, which you say you could. We have a little time,
yeah.
So after that, then we can open it to questions.
Yeah, before I do that, because you made this point a little earlier, before we went up to Begum Hazrat Mahal, you were talking about the talukdars, who were mostly Thakurs or Kaysts, and certainly, I would say more than 90% of them were Hindus, and maybe this was a factor in the great communal harmony, religious harmony that prevailed during the course of the rebellion in Awadh. Now, there's a little bit I want to read out because I think it's one of the most moving statements that came out of the rebel side. When the sepoys in Rai Bareli rose in mutiny, the land revenue officer in Rai Bareli was a man called Captain Barrow. And he was, of course, he feared he would be killed and his family, his wife and his young children would be killed. So he ran for shelter to the Talukdar of Kalakankar, Hanuman Singh, whose descendant later became a minister, foreign minister, Dinesh Singh. Hanuman Singh actually gives them shelter, unhesitatingly. And then when he thinks it's an opportune moment, he provides them a boat to take them down to the safer territory of Allahabad. And as Barrow wrote about it, as Barrow is about to board the boat, he turns to Hanuman Singh, of course, to express his gratitude, and then says, "What are you going to do now?" And according to Barrow, this is what Hanuman Singh said to him. Allow me to read this.
Please.
Sahib, your countrymen came into this country and drove out our king. You sent your officers around the districts to examine the titles to the estates. At one blow, you took from me lands which from time immemorial had been in my family. I submitted. Suddenly, misfortune fell upon you. The people of the land, mark those words, the people of the land arose against you. You came to me whom you had despoiled. I have saved you. You came to me whom you had despoiled. I have saved you. But now, Now I march at the head of my retainers to Lucknow to try and drive you from the country. To drive you from the country. I want to underline here, this is perhaps what you would identify as Awadhi or Lucknowi culture. Look at the sense of honor that underlines this very eloquent statement. You came to me in danger. It was my honor to save you. I have saved you. Having saved you, there is a greater honor that is beckoning me. That greater honor is to serve my country and go to Lucknow.
And this is a very typical Lucknowi tradition. I think the Lucknowis here will all recognize this, that doing your duty to your friends and those who seek is one, seek your help is one, but overriding is your duty to your Watan. I think this is a lesson that we can all learn from that time. This lady Kanize Murad has written this novel. It's a fictional biography of Begum Hazrat Mahal. Many of you would have read it. Called the City of Silver and Gold, the City of Gold and Silver. And Kanize Murad is from the Talukdari house of Kotwara, Mr. Muzaffar Ali's stepsister. Mr. Muzaffar Ali has been participating in this function also. But she is settled in France. And in her work, she has talked about this fact as to how the rebellion or the uprising in Lucknow was distinct from other uprisings in other parts of India at the time in the humane manner in which that war was conducted. And it's interesting that you mention about Begum Hazrat Mahal's role in actually planning and strategizing, because in this case, the relief of the residency, in Kanize Murad has mentioned that the relief of the residency was actually allowed by Begum Hazrat Mahal so that the residents, the British residents of the residency could be evacuated from the city before she re-established the control of the House of Awadh on the residency. So how would you say that this war was conducted, and in what ways is Awadh or Lucknow distinct from other places which were engaged in this uprising of 1857? Just one little more point. Delhi fell soon after, had fallen by September. Lucknow resisted for a much longer period and continued till it was taken by 30,000 Gurkha troops. The fact that Lucknow continued the resistance for so much longer, and then the resistance after even the fall of Lucknow continued into the countryside till Begum Hazrat Mahal was virtually hounded out of the country. How would you account for that?
There are a number of ways in which what is happening in Lucknow and Awadh is different, and specifically also the role of Hazrat Mahal. One is, this I think is a very important point to understand what is happening in Lucknow and Awadh. If you look at any of the other centers where the old members of the previous ruling class, previous in the sense before the annexations carried out by the English East India Company, whether it's Bahadur Shah, whether it's Nana Sahib in Bitur, whether it's the Rani of Jhansi in Lucknow, all of them in a sense are being pressurized by the people around them, sepoys and the civil population, to join and head the rebellion. The classic case, of course, is that of Bahadur Shah, where the sepoys and the people, some sections of the people of Delhi actually go unheard of in Mughal times, that they actually go into, with their horses, shoes and turbans and everything, into the Diwani Khas and surround him and say, "We have started our Gadar, you become our leader." What choice does an old man have? I mean, surrounded by such an angry group of rebellion. I mean, similarly, Nana Sahib encounters such an angry group of people, rebels in Kalyanpur. Okay, so, but that is not required in Awadh. The leader of the Awadh rebellion or the Lucknow rebellion doesn't need any kind of popular pressure, because she is not a quote-unquote reluctant rebel. She is a rebel from day one. It's as if the rebellion is in her DNA, and she feels that it's a duty, it's her honor to uphold the dynasty to which she was married into, and the kingdom into which she was married into. So this is one very, very important distinction so far Awadh is concerned. The second, of course, is that no other part of India saw the level of popular participation that the rebellion in Awadh, led by Begum Hazrat Mahal, saw. That's why I call it a people's resistance. The people of Awadh were up in arms. Okay, so this is another, the intensity of the fighting, the scale of the fighting, both in numerical terms as well as in military terms, were quite different than in any other part of India. And this explains also why it lasted so long, till January 1858. So the rebellion in Lucknow goes through three phases, if I may say, typecast it in that way. So one is immediately after Chinhat. Okay, when the residency is surrounded, Henry Lawrence also gave orders that all Europeans living in Lucknow and its environs should take shelter in the residency. And the residency is surrounded, and there is almost continuous and 24-hour shelling going on of the residency. Following this is what is called the first relief of Lucknow. In the British terms, it's called the first relief of Lucknow. In the middle of July, 17th July, I think Outram and Havelock enter the residency. But it's not a relief at all, because having entered the residency, they cannot get out of the residency. They still remain continuously surrounded, and in fact all reports say that the level and the intensity of the attack on the residency in fact is greater than what it was before the relief arrived. And then of course in November, which is the real relief, when Campbell's troops, together with the Gakhas, come into Lucknow, and that's the real relief of Lucknow. And that's when Lucknow is actually sacked and plundered completely and indiscriminately, as it were. So, and that's where when Birjis Qadar has to escape from Lucknow into the countryside. Now, if you look at it in another way, forget about the relief, there's another pattern that is emerging. When the first attack on the residency starts after Chinhat, the descriptions say that all the talukdars and their men and the peasants are actually trooping into Lucknow to help in attacking the residency. Lucknow was already a very populous city, 370,000 people in 1857, and more people are coming in. And it's the Begum sees it at her duty to feed these people, the soldiers, etc., etc. So there is a coming in of the Awadh countryside into Lucknow, okay? And then after the second real relief of Campbell, exactly the opposite happens. Lucknow goes into the countryside when Begum Hazrat Mahal goes into the countryside. And the battle is actually carried out in Faizabad, in Baraj, in Gonda, in Baiswara, particularly in Baiswara. And she's gradually closed in, as it were, by two strands of two different streams of Campbell's troops, and she is hounded into Lucknow. So I think that This is one of the reasons, the popular participation and the fact that even after Lucknow has fallen has been sacked, the rebellion carries on in the countryside. So that only fortifies the point that when I say it's a people's resistance.
But also in that context, and you have mentioned the question of the union of Dharma and Deen. But what about the role of the Maulvi at that time, who led the religious clergy in their revolt against the East India Company? Was this a challenge to Begum Hazrat Mahal's leadership, or was it in compliance with the Begum's leadership?
There is only, as far as I know, there is only one challenge to the Begum's leadership, and that also for a very brief period. And that's articulated by the Maulvi, Ahmedullah Shah. Okay? But he sees herself as a challenger to Begum Hazrat Mahal, and in fact, actually at one point declares himself to be a king. And he also issues a separate proclamation called Fateh-e-Islam. Okay, interesting, he calls it Fateh-e-Islam, which is not something that the Begum would have done. But as I say, it's a very, very brief period. They are reconciled and he accepts the Begum's leadership, and of course then he is killed in battle. So the question of challenge to the Begum's leadership doesn't really arise.
Now at this point, should we open it up for a discussion?
Yeah, I'm happy.
Any points that the member of the audience would like to make, or any questions that you would like to ask?
Or if somebody is in the audience who knows more about Begum Hazrat Mahal, I'm happy to take notes.
I doubt whether that will be the case, because as I said to you earlier, she has been too little written about. In fact, in one of these earlier Litfests, Nasiruddin Shah was here, and I've spoken about why doesn't he now make a film on Begum Hazrat Mahal? There have been films made about all these other leaders, but there hasn't about. So he said he didn't have a story. Otherwise he would. And you are of course now full of stories, so I think that you will be able to enlighten us on many questions that the audience may have.
Yes, Atulji.
Number one, thank you, Professor Mukherjee, for this wonderful reintroduction to us Lucknow walas about our own Begum Hazrat Mahal. And my apologies that it's like the pyramid has come to Lucknow and Lucknow walas are not there in greater numbers to see the pyramid. You have come, you have been a pyramid of the 1857 scholarship, and there should have been more people because we are talking about Lucknow, and so apologies. And number two, taking ahead from where Wajahat Sahab has left, that now, because there are chances of these films getting made, we have just seen a film on Rani Jhansi, no matter how good or bad, but nevertheless it was a full-fledged film. So now is the time when something on Begum Hazrat Mahal could be made, when as soon as your book that you have been talking about is written. And now the question, who were the generals and the other people? Because it could not have been just the queen and the 12-year-old boy. There must have been other people in between. Tell us something about those people who were arranging this. As you said, 375,000 people here, and then other people coming in. So there was a whole army exercise which was happening. For the charge, the cannonballs you needed and everything you needed. So who were the people who were kind of our generals?
So, in the initial stages of the rebellion, her closest advisor seems to be Raja Jailal Singh from Faizabad. This is not the main Faizabad line, not Man Singh. Man Singh comes into the rebellion a little later, as does Mahmudabad, in fact. And but in the later stages of the rebellion, the most important figure, and he in fact escapes with her, is all the time with her and escapes into Nepal with her, is Rana Beni Madhav of Shankarpur, who is also one of the principal organizers and the principal organizers of the resistance that is happening in the countryside in Baiswara and in northeastern Awadh as well. And there are others as well. Hanuman Singh is one of them. I've talked about him. Lal Madhu Singh of Amethi, the Raja of Dandiya Khera. these are all very important figures, talukdars, all very important figures who are standing shoulder to shoulder, if you like, with Begum Hazrat Mahal in offering and organizing the resistance.
And so beautiful that all the names that you have taken are all Hindus who are standing with her and for her. I mean, this is Lucknow, friends.
No, a point that I was wanting to bring across here, and which has so been explicitly explained by the learned professor, is the fact that, you know, the British sought to project this as Muslim rule, कि मुसलमानों का राज था. तो राज क्या था? हाँ, नवाब तो राज मुसलमान था, लेकिन उसके साथ जो राज कर रहे थे उनमें से अक्सरियत ये थी कि जो मुसलमान ही नहीं थे, लेकिन वो आपस में इम्तियाज़ नहीं करते थे. मुसलमान हिंदू दोनों एक ही स्ट्रगल में मिल के लड़ रहे थे.
सर जब से ओके मैम, जब से हमने 1857 के गदर को पढ़ा तो जो उसके विफलताओं के कारण थे उसमें पहला कारण होता था सभी अपने हितों के लिए लड़ रहे थे. तो मेरा सवाल बस इतना है कि अगर अंग्रेज बेगम हजरत महल के पुत्र को वली बना देते या नाना साहेब को बिठूर का नेतृत्व दे देते और पेंशन देने लग जाते, तो क्या ये नेतृत्वकर्ता उस समय अपराइजिंग में हिस्सा लेते कि नहीं? मैं बड़ी विनम्रता से माफ़ी चाहता हूँ, ऐसे बड़े लोगों से करता ही नहीं, लेकिन मेरा प्रश्न है
that he in his readings about the uprising has read about the fact that most of the rulers who rose had done so out of self-interest. And the question he put was that if Nana Sahib had been given the pension that was due to him, if Rani of Jhansi his son had been accepted as heir, then would they have cared to join the uprising?
So my only answer to that question is, somebody comes, takes away my kingdom and then offers to pay me a pension. Who's the person? Who is he to give me a pension? It's my kingdom. You have taken it away. They are not fighting for their pension. They are fighting for what they think is their sovereign right. It's not about a pension. It's about maintaining a sovereignty which has been illegally taken away from them by a bunch of plunderers. The English East India Company was nothing more than a bunch of plunderers. All of them should have been in jail in 20th century India as looters. Every single one of them. So let's not have any sympathy for the British and the servants of the English East India Company who looted, plundered, raped and killed.
ये अंग्रेज कोई सरकार नहीं थी, ये सिर्फ ये डाकू थे जो डाका डालने के लिए आए थे. तो उनके डाके को मानते हुए क्यों उनसे लड़ा ना जाए.
How much of was she a woman that the war is remembered as a brave fight put up against the colonialists?
Here was a woman who, out of her own agency, her own sense of what she thought to be honorable, took into her hands the reins of history. She needn't have. She could have just remained with her son and gone somewhere else. But she decided to seize that moment because, and this is where she is exercising her agency, which is remarkable in the middle of the 19th century for a woman to do in India. That she is seizing her agency and thereby making for herself a place in history, which is a male-dominated place in the middle of the 19th century and remains a male-dominated place.
Thank you.